Hi, everyone. We are at the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. I am JC, and I am in Learning and Development here at GitLab, so I'll be the host for today's call. I'd like to welcome you to our live learning session on inclusion training. If you've attended some of our sessions in the past, this session is set up a little bit differently, so we'll run through some content. There will be some breakout sessions, and then we'll come back and discuss as a group, so just so you're prepared for that. There is an agenda in the calendar invite that kind of shows you how it'll be set up, and there's also a place for you to add questions that you may have, and there's also links to the slides in there as well, but we will present them so that you can see them. So who'll be helping out with today's call? You already met me, and then Candace is our diversity and inclusion partner or manager, and she will be running through the content for us today. And she is our subject matter expert here at GitLab, so we'll probably be able to answer a lot of your questions as well. And then Sung Hae, our chief people officer, helped design this call or this session. So I will go ahead and pass it over to Candace to start us off on the content.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your schedules to attend. Hopefully, you'll be able to have some great takeaways. There are three things that we want to make sure you get out of this session. One is our position on diversity and inclusion, and specifically what inclusion means here at GitLab. We want to make sure you understand the part you have in creating and sustaining an inclusive environment here at GitLab. And we also want to make sure that you understand the behaviors that result in being inclusive. One of the things that's fundamental to the success, not only with GitLab, with any environment where you're trying to create inclusiveness, is understand that we're all responsible for creating and maintaining that here at GitLab, but also that you should feel empowered. It's not any single person's responsibility. It's not mine. It's not JC's. It's not our chief people officers. It's everyone's. We want to make sure that everyone feels empowered to speak up, that everyone feels empowered to be a part of the movement, so that everyone feels empowered to contribute as well. A lot of times people kind of think, when you think about diversity and inclusion, you want to kind of bucket it into two different groups, but there's so many aspects about diversity and inclusion, and they go together, of course, synonymously, but at the same time, they're different. Diversity is when you think about all the differences that we each hold, like how we grew up, where we went to school, the experiences we have, how we react to certain environments or certain stimulus, our age, our race, our gender, national origin, a lot of things that we can see and that we can't see, like whether it's neurodiversity, someone on the spectrum, bipolar, anxiety disorders. There are a lot of the things you can and can't see. So people automatically think sometimes that it's black or white or just by race, but there's so many things that make us up. Inclusion is the piece where you think about all the diversity aspects of someone and you decide to yourself, you know what, I'm going to still invite them to be a part of the party. It's understanding and recognizing the differences and still finding the way to collaborate with someone despite all the things that make them up. And when we think about what inclusive behaviors feel like and what they look like, have you ever had a moment where you've been given the cold shoulder for some reason, or maybe you may be interpreting that you're given the cold shoulder, or something happens where you feel excluded to a degree? Well, when we think about the behaviors and what they look like, these will help us manage those so that we think about what can we do to make the environment better, or how can we look inward at ourselves to make sure that we are being inclusive. One of the things that I think about first in regards to behaviors is that we include and seek input from team members across a wide variety of backgrounds. When we think about how much we have and the opportunity here at GitLab where everyone is 100% remote, we have different countries represented. So when you think about if you're working on a project or you're thinking about things that you're trying to build out, it's automatic sometimes that you gravitate towards someone that looks like your work function, someone, for example, in people ops where I sit, or someone in engineering, you may gravitate to someone in engineering. But when you think about how you want things to be innovative and you want to include other inputs, then try to seek those outside of your backgrounds. Think about that as you try to build out coffee chats and you're trying to build out a project, have those initial conversations. Active listening is another piece where we want to listen carefully to the person speaking and play back what they've said in an effort to show understanding. I don't know about you, but I've had times where I have been in a discussion with someone or talking, and then on the back of my mind, I may be thinking about, wow, I want to tell them this next sentence, or I want to make sure they understand what I mean by this. And so sometimes we may forget and we may block out and not have an opportunity to really be actively listening because we have our own personal point or agenda we want to get across. So the active listening is really key in one of the behaviors. So kind of take a moment to play back what someone has said to you in an effort to show understanding. And in hand with that, you want to make a habit of asking questions. When we think about asking questions and not just probing, but really asking questions to find out what more can we learn from this situation. And if you have a strong reaction to someone, you want to ask yourself why. You want to take a moment and look inward. So for me, there are a lot of times where I may have past experiences at other companies, or your personal life may kind of roll over into work. Sometimes you may be having a good day, bad day, and you take a moment and you may react and you may think to yourself, wow, I probably shouldn't have reacted that way. Or you may feel a moment to say, wow, why do I feel this way? So if you can take a moment sometimes to take a step back and look inward, it can be very helpful. Another inclusive behavior is to address misunderstandings and quickly resolve disagreements. I know here at work we get really busy sometimes and you don't have time always to want to have these crucial conversations. But if you take the approach to address things quickly, you won't have someone feel excluded because there's going to always be that awkward tension until you have a chance to talk about it. You want to make a point to understand each team member's contribution efforts and leverage them as much as possible. I have been in team environments where someone may not be as vocal as the next person, but they contribute in the way that's unique to them. So if you have the ability to be able to kind of hone in on that and think about those that are on your team or in a group discussion or on a call and say to yourself, I really want to make sure that these contributions from this individual understood. This person has done a great deal of work. I want to speak to what they've done. Thank you to this person. It really goes a long way. In that same respect, we want to think about all voices being heard to include everyone as much as possible in discussions. So to the point of someone who's maybe really quiet or not even quiet, but they may choose not to want to get involved in every discussion, or a lot of them. You want to make sure that we have an opportunity to say, hi, Thomas, what is your viewpoint on this? Or, hi, Nadia, what do you think about, this particular issue? And sometimes people may not even have an opportunity to address it. So just taking a moment to include them it really goes a long way. And our eighth behavior, and this isn't the end of it, the list can be exhaustive, but we want to assume positive intent and examine our assumptions and judgments. And so when we think about that, we want to think about, sometimes I can give an example of how when I was working in a past company, I was speaking to a group, and in the process of speaking, there was an individual in the group and she would jot down notes, and then she would, put her head up and jot down additional notes. And what I noticed is when I spoke, as opposed to other people that were speaking, she would stop. And so immediately I thought, wow, I wonder why she's not writing down or capturing what I'm saying. But my assumption was that, I was trying not to judge even in this diversity and inclusion seat, but it made me think, well, what is the reason? Later on, learning that this individual was kind of hearing impaired in some spots, and so therefore she couldn't hear everything. And so I had to slow down so she could read my lips. So that's an example of how we want to assume positive intent and not always be so quick to judge. There's a link at the bottom if you want to look at our inclusive language that we use here at GitLab. Again, this is not an exhaustive list as well, but it's an example of different things that you can think about when we're considering inclusive language. We are now going to take 15 minutes and go to our breakout group exercise. I will go over the breakout session points that we want to make sure. You're going to pick one scenario to work on. We're going to talk about how you can address the situation. You take 15 minutes in the breakout room. Feel free to pick one person to nominate to summarize your group and the conclusions, because when we return, we'll have that person speak to what you summarize. And if you would like to, and you get to your 15 minutes earlier, please feel free to go to one of the other scenarios. You don't have to spend the entire time on one question, although some people in some groups have felt this was very helpful to talk about it more, and we've walked away with some great ideas. So get ready to join your breakout groups. Hi, everyone. Hopefully you all had some really, really, really good conversations. I know in the group I was in, we did, so much so that I kind of left some sentences out. Hopefully our spokesperson will be able to summarize. I wanted to take a minute, and we can start at the top instead of skipping around. We, just kind of go through and get some feedback from each group. I'm going to do my best to be cognizant of time because the last one kind of we did it right at time, but it's really good discussion. So the first one we have is afraid to speak up. Um, it looks like our breakout group 5. Who's the spokesperson for this group?
I can talk. So we actually we came to this one after we had finished up talking about another one. So we just had a few key points that came up. One thing that a few folks said was really after, don't interrupt the manager, but as soon as the manager finishes whatever their comment that they say, circle back to Zoe. Say, hey, Zoe, you were saying, and or ask her a question about, so she has a chance to speak up. And a lot of times that might even bring it to the attention of the manager that they interrupted because they may not have, even done it on purpose or realize what they had done. Another thing that came up is, since here at GitLab, we should always praise in public and then correct somebody in private. Maybe after that meeting, we have a one-on-one session with your manager, speak up at that point and say, hey, I know Zoe has wanted to try to contribute a lot more, but during the last meeting when she did, you interrupted her, which might prevent her from doing that again in the future if she doesn't, feel comfortable doing that. But we did also bring up that there is the concern of kind of this power dynamic of you as the employee, then correcting your manager.
Yeah.
One other question that came up is, we say praise in public, correct in private, but we also make a point, in other places in the handbook of saying, if you see something, say something and correct it right away. So how do you balance that in these types of situations? When is it appropriate to definitely do something one-on-one versus when might it make sense to speak up?
Well, that's a great call out, Susanna. So thank you for summarizing your group, first of all, and thank you for referencing the tools that we have, which is to think about it from the two things that you brought up, see something, say something, versus as well as praise in public, correct in private. I think when we think about the balance to that, it's one of those things where you think about when is it, appropriate as such. So if someone is rude, for example, I feel like there are times when you have to see something, say something at that moment. I feel like there's that kind of choose your battle, not to let the battle go at all, but to say, with someone, it's not, I'm the meter who's decided on who's rude or not, but, if someone is just deliberately mean and ill-spirited, to call it out at that moment. But if it's something that can wait to behind closed doors to have a conversation, to wait. I think this is also an opportunity for us and myself to kind of take a look at the handbook to say, what is some additional wording that we can use to support what this may be? So thank you for that. Breakout group 4, who's your spokesperson? Feel afraid to speak up.
I don't know if we actually ended up with having a spokesperson, but I wouldn't mind doing it quickly. I think we kind of got something similar than Breakout Group 5. We also mentioned celebrating in public, one-on-one for critique. And then something that was mentioned that if the topic was limited in people who can chime into, then also limited in time as whoever is kind of leading the meeting, so that would already limit it a little bit. A thought that we made was maybe the manager was just excited and interrupted because of that. So kind of then as an observer, just to be like, hey, Zoe, why don't you finish what you were talking about? Kind of just accepting what the manager did, but then going back to what Zoe said. And I think that could help with the manager balance. You're not critiquing someone in public, but you're just helping Zoe kind of being in the group as well. We also managed like maybe discussing it one-on-one with the manager, but that again, the power balance would leave us a little bit. How do you do that without pointing fingers too much as an observer, or putting Zoe in a spot where they could think like, oh, Zoe complained about me. And then one of our group members had this happen to them and didn't say anything at the time because they didn't know the people yet. They were new at GitLab, and so that's also a bit like you're still getting to know people. So how do you deal with that, because you don't know how they will react if you would say something. And that's kind of where then I accidentally hit enter on going back to this session, so I didn't hear the end of the group.
Well, if anyone from your group has any additional comments, please feel free to add to Anne's summary, which she did a great job at.
That kind of summarizes it. One thing we didn't quite get to, though, I feel like when you do go to deliver the maybe concerning feedback in a one-on-one setting, it's useful to try to relate things back to our values and kind of emphasize why this might be the path moving forward in terms of our future collaboration, inclusion, and just general I'm trying to think of a way to talk about our diversity and how we can really encompass that and allow that to incorporate additional ideas and so forth. We didn't quite get that far in our discussion there, but I just want to kind of add that.
No, I love that. That's a great point, because a part of that is to continue to do better as we continue to innovate, and iterate. It's not a one stop. So as we evolve, even with these scenarios, hopefully everyone will take away and go back to say, you see something in the handbook, or you want to send an email to myself at diversity and inclusion at gitlab.com. I'll include that. But I want to make sure that we do hear our voices and that we do get the feedback. And just like with anything else, the MRs, please go, open those up and send them, because we want to make sure that we're doing our best to do our best. It looks like we have politics at work. Breakout group 3, I know we didn't decide on a spokesperson, so who would like to speak up and do it? Anyone from Breakout Group 3? Vladimir, Jeanne, Christine, Haley, want to jump in and speak about what was discussed in Breakout Group 3?
Hi, sure. This is Christine. So Haley had some really well thought out thoughts and feedback. I thought that we looked at two things. Number one was using the term "hey guys" or "guys," which I had mentioned. That is something in my vocabulary, being from the United States. I didn't even know that it was offensive. So, that's become something that I personally have been trying to work at, and even in our conversation, I dropped it. So it is an exercise of trying to really be thoughtful about what you say, how you say it, and who you're speaking to. So I've found that topic to be personally very enlightening. And Haley had mentioned that she does it a lot too. So something that we all can work on. But I think that even just, and that actually goes to the other topic that we talked about,
Christine,
which politics.
Sorry, I'm jumping in because I think they were going in order of the breakout scenarios and not in the groups. So people might be confused because we're jumping ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay, because I wanna make sure there isn't that confusion there, right? I think we were on politics at work, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Breakout Group 3, whoever wants to speak to what politics at work.
Go for it, Christine.
Oh yeah. So tying back to that, that's what we then went to, was politics at work. So just again, learning, remembering what you should be saying or not saying, and what may offend folks. We all agreed that keeping politics out of work is much easier actually than keeping guys out of the vernacular. So.
And I thought you made a good point, Christine, when you spoke about DC and how people kind of speak out just about anywhere, because that's the nature of the climate there. And so, you had mentioned handling a holistic way. I thought that was awesome, because I'm sure that is a different way of living in such a political climate there in DC. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got my thoughts on this.
Yeah.
Just sorry to interrupt on politics at work. I completely understand that, we don't talk about religion and politics that's fair enough. But I think there is some exception that maybe I would like to suggest, especially, but now it's all resolved, I would say. But 2 years ago, or a couple of years ago, my situation wasn't, I didn't have enough visibility. Why? Because I am a French citizen living in the UK. And with the Brexit, we were like kind of involved in the politics. And not only me, but all the companies and my previous company as well. So I didn't know what is going to happen for me, for how I'm going to do my job properly if there is this kind of scenario. And the question was as well for the companies, what would you do if there is a hard Brexit with your European citizen living in the UK? So at that time, I wanted to know how my company will support me in case of. But anyway, this is like a very unique scenario. So yeah, talking about politics, okay, not talking about politics, completely agree with this, except when companies and employees are involved, like we don't have any choice, such as the Brexit. So sometimes employees, they need to get more clarification of how the company will react in case of this or this. But that's it.
No, that's a great point. We need to understand our position to support our employees. And we also need to understand that sometimes we will have to open an issue to move it along because there are things that we need to think about and consider. So, that's something addition we need to make to the handbook.
I feel like there's a difference here because we're not discussing ideology, but rather this politic exists.
Exactly.
What does it mean for me? And it's not like discussing, is it good, is it bad? No, it happens. What happens for me?
Yeah, exactly. So that's I would say, the exception that I would say. So it's not politic the way how it's described, but it's another way of politics. But anyway, thank you for your understanding.
No, thank you.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. I did have to reach out to my manager for the country hiring practice because I was planning to visit China and visit our colleagues in China. I had to clarify if I can bring my laptop and use it there. So perhaps it's not politics, but it is related to our practice and the policies. I keep it private because I don't have a place in our Slack or public forum to ask those questions.
That's a great point, Sherry, and thank you, Alexander, for that as well. And the additional comments we had, I will reference the handbook just to assure that we have some exceptions. Because even when we open those issues, sometimes those conversations can turn from all that we're providing support and understanding and clarity to go from discussing it, which does go back to this one. So we'll make sure that we have some additions to that. Breakout Group 6, any additional topics, any additional comments you want to provide for politics at work?
Yes, hi, Annette here. Yeah, we had a good discussion around that topic as well. And basically, obviously, the easy answer is try and steer clear of having those kind of discussions or make those comments. But recognize that everybody's entitled to have their own opinion, and then change the topic if possible. Instead of commenting further, just try and change the topic.
I was just going to ask you what, did anyone from your team give any commentary on how do you kind of pivot that when it does come up? What was the handling for it? So thank you for that. We have our question scenario C, which is being heard. We had one group to discuss this. Anyone want to be a spokesperson for Breakout Group 3?
Yeah, I'm happy to, since I sort of bridged it. I think we shared some examples of this happening, and I think I shared in a personal example. And I think one of the things we talked about is that sometimes the being heard is maybe a less vocal teammate, and as it shows in the example. But I'm quite vocal. For those of you who know me as well, and probably hearing me talk now. So I think what we talked about was the difficulty in the ability to recognize it, but the difficulty in understanding how to address it. And Vladimir, I think, made a good point about maybe relating it a bit to active listening, where you're also it's also the positive intent piece. So there wasn't anything intentional that maybe he didn't think my opinion or my response to a question was valid, but more he was sort of listening and how he wanted to respond. It didn't have that opportunity. So maybe active listening is something to promote, where if you're not feeling comfortable bridging it, maybe addressing it in a way where you're talking more about active listening and more positive things to avoid any sort of negative opinion that comes in. But we did this, I think, when there was less than 5 minutes to go. So if any other teams have thoughts on how you can successfully sort of bridge the communication there, I think it would be super helpful. But I think it's a really tough one.
It is a really tough one. Any additional comments? Ryan, Haley gave a good example of how recently one of her colleagues had gotten sick and she had to stand in. And in the process of her answering questions, her colleague would answer the same questions, different wording. And so it got to be annoying to a point, but she noticed this continuing. And so it was one of those things where do you make a decision to kind of just deal with it internally and no one knows, and you kind of walk off quietly and you're the only one with the problem, or do you address it and, kind of say, hey, I noticed this. So any additional comments, please feel free to, let me hear those. I would love to hear them. If not, we can move on to guys. It's up to you all.
I think just to say, hey, it sounds like you're in violent agreement with what Nancy mentioned earlier, and then just to make sure credit's given where credit's due, and to show not to create a rift, right? But just to say, look, it's kind of the combination of making sure being inclusive, but also establishing that common shared purpose. We're all trying to get the same successful outcome, and look, this is actually bringing us together, not tearing us apart.
Yeah, it's a good point, Dave. So, giving the credit where credit is due is really important. And also, you can kind of be your own advocate. It's one of those situations where you have to decide, it's only going to bother me because this person doesn't know. And so a way of sometimes speaking up, but not speaking up is to say, to your point, to that person, exactly what I was stating. I really appreciate you reiterating my thoughts. There are ways that you can kind of tie it together to bring attention to it so that they understand. That usually works really well as well. So we have our guys scenario. This is always a very popular one in all of our calls. We're at 9:41. I want to make sure we're cognizant, but I want to hear, as many as we can address and give JC an opportunity to wrap this up as well. So Breakout one, what are your thoughts on guys?
Yeah, this is Amanda. I'm going to represent for group one. So just speaking to the scenario itself, where there are two team members that during a team member call, one is using the word guys repeatedly, the other one has made their feelings known that it's not an inclusive word. What do you as the third party do in this situation? And so we thought, the first choice for us would be in offline in a DM or something, reach out to the person who continues to use the word and just kind of bring it to their attention. We should assume positive intent and assume that the person isn't repeatedly saying it to annoy the other person, though it may be the case. And so we would remind them that this is not inclusive language, maybe speak to our own personal experience if we had one, or that of others that we've heard of who had struggled with it as well. Provide some tips on things that this person can do to try and replace it, assuming that there's no malice, that it's just kind of a slip of the tongue. There are different things that we brainstormed here in our list of things they can do to kind of force more attention to the vocabulary you're using. If at that point, maybe the person brings up that, well, they don't care, or they don't agree, or something of that nature, then, I think probably at that point you raise it to your manager, because we're all team members here, and we're all meant to kind of support one another, not try and create a rift or have bad intent.
I love that. Thank you, Amanda. It's always great to be an advocate for your team members, like you say, to support each other and not escalate things when they don't need to be escalated, because that brings up other issues. But to your point, and once it becomes one, then there's a different discussion. So Breakout Group 5, spokesperson for that.
Susanna, were we group 5?
Yes.
Do you want to represent us?
Sure. So one of the things that we talked about, I think other people have already said this, is that it is a word that's just very pervasive in American slang. So this is something that people tend to slip into a lot. You know, if you're another person in that group, even if you weren't bothered when you hear it, it might make sense to take the person aside afterwards, just like as we've talked about with other things, and just mention it to them, one-on-one, especially since the other person, there's kind of this active antagonism between these two groups. So it might be appropriate to say something after the fact. We talked about other options of words that you potentially could use. But I guess there's also, the overall concern of making sure that everybody feels comfortable saying something. We don't want someone to be upset and not feel comfortable being able to say something.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Thanks. We have Breakout Group 6 and Breakout Group 3 left. We're at 9:45. And let's see, Breakout Group 6, who do we have that wants to speak up for that group?
Sure. Hi, Annette again. Yeah, I mean, agree with everything that's already been said. And then it's the same here in the United Kingdom. It's very, very common and normal to say guys. None of us that were in our group are taking offense, but we do need to remember that some people might. So I think, well, we discussed loads of alternatives that you can use instead, and just try and lead by example, and try and use more inclusive wording ourselves.
I think the lead by example is a great, that speaks volumes. So that kind of says a lot to it. Breakout Group 3.
Candace,
I think
I wonder if it's not...
Nadia, what were you about to say?
Go for it, Nadia.
I think you skipped Breakout Room 2 instead of 3.
Where are they? Look, we're under guys. I see 1, 5, 6, and 3.
Okay. I just thought I'd speak up for Breakout Room 2.
Please do.
Yeah. So, but no, we didn't speak about guys. So I'm speaking out of term.
We spoke about the first scenario that we started with.
Yeah.
So we got skipped over in the beginning.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Please speak up.
It's okay.
You know what? You talking about with afraid to speak up? See, Breakout Group 2, it was blank. So my apologies. I didn't think my apologies. There was no wording type. So I apologize. So please go back to
no worries.
Nadia,
I probably didn't complete anything because I just switched over and carried on. So we didn't speak about any of the others. We literally used the entire time to speak about afraid to speak up. And I think this is a leadership thing at GitLab. I think leaders need to be super aware of it and really take responsibility for it. We manage small teams. So we have 10 people in a team, and we spoke a little bit about you can then really get to know your team members better, regardless of at what level you are. And so noticing someone being afraid of speaking up, it's really on the manager to make sure that they're aware of that and that they give them the space. So even though in this instance, the example, after reading it again, we notice that, it's the manager that interrupts them. But I think it's so important that it is a leadership thing, and it is that leaders notice and that they take responsibility for those type of things at GitLab. We spoke a little bit about making sure that if you notice someone speaks over, so very similar to the other examples that was shared, and maybe if you notice someone continues to struggle to speak up and it's not something they're comfortable in doing, maybe saying something like, hey, that's a fantastic idea in a one-on-one. Why don't you open an issue, or do you prefer I open an issue and give you the credit for this awesome idea? And giving them that trust, because I also think this is a huge trust aspect, and build rapport with them to speak up in other ways if in a group setting isn't ideal for them. But yeah, back to guys, so back to D, whoever's been skipped.
I'm so sorry, but no, and Nadia, I know that you are super great at this from a team environment, from a personal perspective. I understand, I know this. And so, I think, kudos to you, number one, in your group for discussing it and laying out the different pieces that we could use to support that effort. Did anyone have any level of saying in your group that they were uncomfortable speaking to them, to follow up with the manager? Because again, you have a very great way of handling these situations.
Nicole, I think you had a good example of two team members that struggled. I can't remember exactly what they struggled with, but I think you mentioned there was an example of someone that did struggle with it.
So there were two. One was about people who like to process things slowly, so having specifically the agendas or other items ahead of time so they could think about it. And then the other one was not necessarily calling out the people who are being quiet until you check in with them first in a one-on-one, because I've had team members who really feel on the spot and extra stressed out if somebody at the end is like, does anybody else have anything to add? And everybody knows it's just that one person who hasn't spoken. So making sure that that's okay to do first and not putting someone on the spot if they, you know, are stressed out by being in the moment forced to give an answer, and just giving them the space to maybe answer it in the notes ahead of time in the agenda or issues.
I love that. I love that. And again, my apologies for skipping over that. We're at time. I'm turning back over to JC. We're beyond time actually, but JC, can you give us a closure?
Yeah, I will wrap up super quickly. So Susanna, you had a question, I think after breakout scenario 1 or during that time. And so I added it to the end, and we will take action on that and try to add some examples to the handbook so that it's a little bit more clear. But other than that, we do have an evaluation form that we would love you all to complete and give us feedback on the session so we know how to improve for next time. And we will also be sending out like a quiz type thing around the session in the next few days. And what we're hoping to do moving forward is have like a badge for completing trainings like this. So keep an eye out for that in your email inbox. But please complete the evaluation form, and thank you so much for taking your time to attend this session today. We really appreciate you being here.